Greetings, mortal dogs! Be not alarmed. I have assumed control of your video devices. It may be that you know me not, though it defies belief. I am the magician's skull, wakened from my deathless slumber, but with one purpose: to bring to you the most magnificent tales of sword and sorcery in this or any other dimension. We are gathered today to celebrate the publication of the 6th issue of my Peerless magazine. Feast your eyes upon its glories. Prepare yourselves for entertainment and enlightenment. But first, a word from our sponsor. I shall return!
Hi, everybody. I'm Joseph Goodman of Goodman Games. Welcome to the first show for Skull TV. The magician Skull himself has deigned to take mortal form and join us to discuss his favorite topic of all, and of course, the world's best topic, which is sword and sorcery. So today we have a great show for you. We have Howard Andrew Jones, our esteemed editor, second to last on the to be immolated list as maintained by the Skull. We have a number of the fantastic authors who have contributed to issue number 6, which is what we're here to discuss today, issue number 6 of Tales from the Magician's Skull. We will be airing a number of other interviews and commentaries by the Skull himself. We'll hear many words of wisdom, and we might even witness the death of an intern or two. Things happen when the Skull is around. But thank you all for joining us. And now I'd like to turn it over live, or I guess technically dead, to the Skull himself, who has agreed to be interviewed by an intern. Let's hear what he has to say.
And we're back. With me now is one of my spineless interns, ready with a series of questions that shall astound and delight you. You may commence.
All right. Well, first, do you want to explain to the audience how you took human form?
Yes. I assumed control of the carcass of intern number 64 so that my appearance would be more soothing to the viewers.
From Twitter, how can others contact the Skull?
If they lack access to a messenger raven or crystal ball, they may use FaceTweet to reach me at skull@goodmangames.com. But be warned, I may respond.
Is it better to be loved or feared?
It is better that all love to fear me.
Instagram asks, what is your favorite poem?
One slept beneath the branches dim, cloaked in the crawling mist, and Richard Grenville came to him and plucked him by the wrist. Also the one about the worm that conquers.
Facebook asks, what is the biggest challenge to an immortal sorcerer working in publishing today?
Modern concepts such as Taco Tuesday and Casual Friday. Also, it has proved most difficult to find reliable and hideous octobears.
From Reddit, why do you like sword and sorcery so much, since you're an evil wizard and barbarians tend to kill those?
I am a benevolent wizard. I visit my wrath only upon the foolish and the unworthy. And I love sword and sorcery because it is the greatest of all genres.
Okay. Twitter asks, why does it take you so long to produce an issue?
At first, this was because I lacked minions, but as my legions have grown, other problems have presented themselves.
Like those interns that fell into the printing press.
Yes, and those deceptively ordinary gorillas who made off with all of my finest paper. But these problems have been righted, and soon my magazine will be available with increasing frequency. This I vow.
All right, from Instagram, you have excellent paper stock. It looks great, better than any other magazine I've ever seen.
This comment pleases me. It is good of you to notice. Many Bothans died in the procurement of that paper, but their sacrifice was not in vain.
From Twitter, where is your other eye?
Ah, yes. Often it is deployed upon the ethereal plane seeking enlightenment. But today, this very day, it floats above the employee break room, seeking to learn the mystery of who keeps stealing Lester's lunch from the refrigerator.
All right, last question. Fantasy is dumb, and sword and sorcery is dumb too?
Blah! Who said that? Who dares? You! Ready my army of octobears. I.P. Freely 32, you shall rue the day that you disparage sword and sorcery. This I vow, you shall feel my wrath.
Hello, everybody.
Here I am with Violette Malan and Gregory Mele, and we're going to be talking about stuff of interest to the readers of Tales from the Magician's Skull. First, I think we should introduce ourselves a little bit. Violet, you've been a member of the Magician's Skull family for quite a while now. Why don't you tell us about your
I
characters?
think I had my first story, I think, was in the second. I can't remember. I think I was, occupied while the first one was being organized. But yeah, I think I've got 3 or 4 stories now, and they're all my my characters, my Sword Sorcery characters, Dylan Wolfshead and Parna Lion's Mane. There are also novels of those, but with these characters. But these are the short stories that they appear in.
And how many novels are there?
4.
Do you intend to keep writing short stories and maybe return to them in longer form sometime?
I would like to. I have, a 5th novel sort of planned, but you know what it's like with your publishers. Sometimes they want something different. So, right. You offer them 2 or 3 different books, and they say, "Ooh, I like the sound of this one." And sometimes it's the one that you wanted to write next, and sometimes it isn't. So, with the short stories themselves, most of them actually take place not only after the 4 novels, but they take place after the 5th novel.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, so I'm hoping eventually one day to produce the 5th novel.
Are any of the books previous short story collections, or are the short stories? Okay.
No, they're all novels.
Do you think that you might seek a publisher to, well, you'll need to write some more short stories for us first,
yes.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Now,
like to do a collection, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, my agent is doing that because he's got quite a few people like Tanya Huff, Charlene Harris, people who have 30, 40, 50 short stories that aren't necessarily like the publishers are really funny about anthologies nowadays. Like, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. But now it's actually quite difficult to convince a publisher to put out an anthology. And this is why, of course, so many people are doing like Joshua Palmatier with his anthologies through Zombies Need Brains.
Yes.
One of the reasons that I think he's always so successful is that there's a market out there for anthology collections, but the publishers don't see it that way. But the regular publishers don't see it that way. So kind of in response to this, my agent, Joshua Bilmes of Jabberwocky, he is creating, or his staff, obviously, not Joshua himself, he's creating anthologies, just e-collections for his clients who would like to have it done. So right now, for example, Tanya must have 7 or 8 e-collections available, simply because she's been writing short stories for the length of time she's been writing them.
Wow.
So they're out there,
Now, one last question before I shift over to Greg. Are there additional Dylan and Parno stories outside of the Skull? I believe you mentioned the Zombies Need Brains.
Yes.
So
I've got
how many are
another 2 or 3, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look. It's on one of these pieces of paper stuck to my wall. Hang on. 1, 2, 3. Yes, 3. Yeah. 4 with you, 3 with Joshua. Yeah. That's
there you go. Okay. So how many more do you think you need for a collection?
Apparently, I have to discuss this with the person in the agency who does this, because it's a minimum of a certain number of words. And I just never got around to adding up the words. So for all I know, I may have it, because it has to be, there's a certain number of words of story, And then you have to put like, an introduction or an afterword or, an introduction to each individual story, the way these things are done. So
Absolutely.
I think for all I know, I may have enough already.
Maybe you have too many.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Write more so you can have 2 collections.
Good idea.
Absolutely. I'm full of them. Greg, tell us about your work. We're featuring your first appearance is already in issue 6, but we have 2 more lined up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your setting?
Sure. Yeah, so this is actually you're going to be debuting both of the character sets that I have that both occur in the same world, but they're very different characters. So the one in issue 6 is the story of Ometal 5 Rabbit and his boss, a sorceress inquisitor called Calcaeus, and they are sort of my I wouldn't really call them Holmes and Watson. They're almost more like Nero. It's almost more like Nero Wolf with feathers, right? And whereas you're also running a story with my hero Sorumos, who is sort of the Odysseus of this world. But the Azalan setting is a little love song to a couple different things that I really enjoy. One is the Bronze Age Near East, and the other is pre-conquest Mesoamerica. And I know, and you think, how the hell does that go together? And it was a really strange thing many years ago on vacation, going to see some Mayan ruins. I realized that all the Cyclopean stonework really reminded me of the ruins of Mycenae. And long story short, I'm of a generation like you, Howard, where we grew up with the kind of the resurgence of sword and sorcery that had come out of the 70s. And, also grew up with stories of lost worlds and forgotten histories, etc. And so I initially was playing with the idea of essentially as a tongue-in-cheek barb at all of the early 20th century ideas that, there's no way these people in the Americas could possibly have built all these pyramids, etc. Someone else had to have come here and shown these dumb savages how to do it. And so I initially started playing with that idea of, well, what if, let's work with that and turn it on its head. And then I decided that, especially right now when there's a huge push for trying to be respectful to cultures that are underrepresented, I wanted to be able to play with history without denigrating anybody's real history, right? So instead, what I essentially did is I created a Hyborian age in North America, because that gives you all kinds of fun things, right? You have these 9-foot-tall terror birds running around. You have saber-toothed tigers. You have llamas, some of which are big enough to ride, running up and down North America. There's elephants. So the best way to think of Azalan is it is sort of a Hyborian age sort of setting. That asks the question of, if a bunch of invaders, a Bronze Age series of invaders had come to this civilization, with the absence of advanced technology, Iron Age technology, and smallpox and a host of other diseases, how big a footing would they have gained? And what would that world look like a few centuries later as these different civilizations had to accommodate each other? So it's an interesting mashup that I've tried to be very respectful to the cultures I've drawn from, but also just to show like how fascinating their mythologies and their civilizations are. And it's funny because like when I give it to some readers, they say, oh, well, you mentioned 9 hells, so that must be the Greek influence, right? But of course, there's 9 levels to the Aztec underworld too. So anyway, so that's the backdrop of the setting. Is this kind of interesting Mesoamerican meets Mycenaean civilization. The characters that are in issue 6, as I said, are investigators, and so that involves it's all told first person through the point of view of the former soldier rostered out through some injuries, now working as the muscle and assistant and General Girl Friday to an inquisitor, Calcaeus. And Calcaeus is he's a stuffed shirt. He reflects all the worst of the Nakali culture, which is to say that he's snooty, he's a bit of a racist, he is a bit of a xenophobe, and he's a sorcerer. And so one of the things I have fun with is constantly having Omadal sort of, who's a mestizo, constantly, kind of rib him. But so that's the setup for that storyline. And I found they were not the original characters I wrote.
It really stood out to me. I mean, when you sent that to me, I was quite excited to see that. And Violet, that leads me to a discussion about, I don't think we've ever discussed in depth what your setting is, your secondary world.
It's, what in university we used to call a complex imaginary world, which is to say I made it up entirely. I obviously use the more or less the physics of the world as we know it. And I even use some, I think I've written some other things, so I'm just making sure I'm talking about the right ones. I'm really horrible with maps. I know that there are some people who are really good, and keeping track of directions and stuff. So what I did for the world that Dylan and Parno live in is I've taken our world, flipped it upside down, and tilted it the opposite way. So that, Dylan is not a northern barbarian, she's a southern barbarian. And, what would be the equivalent of the Asian empires is the Great King in the West. And, this kind of thing. So, if you're careful, especially if you look around the Mediterranean area, which is the place other than Canada I know best, you can actually figure out where some of this, where some of the stories are set. And, I have, in the fourth novel is called Path of the Sun, and I have a labyrinth. So I think you can pretty well guess what, flipped on its back island I'm using for that particular setting. So in that sense, I'd have to say pre-Renaissance, in terms of level of technology. However, there is a race of ancient old ones that are, semi-legendary. So that frankly, if I need to have a weapon that would be unlikely to exist in the same time period as other things, it's just a relic of those people. So I get around the anachronistic aspects of the technology that way. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, we're talking horses and, swords, bows and arrows, no refrigeration. You can only eat the stuff that's in season and the stuff that came from not very far away, unless it's preserved in some, specific way. Same thing with clothing. It's all basically, if you think, well, roughly, and not so much color, as the Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn, people are sort of dressed like that, but not so much Maid Marian, more the people in the forest.
And not so much Technicolor, perhaps.
And not so much Technicolor, because
Yeah.
How they, only rich people wore red, and I always thought about that was a little weird about Will Scarlet. Like, how rich was he in his real life? To have all that scarlet cloth. But I never asked.
So, hang on a second. All right, I'm sorry. I thought the skull was signaling to me. Okay. Let's see. What do you think the secrets are to good adventure writing?
Who are you asking?
You guys.
Whoever talks first.
Okay, I guess whoever talks first, right? So I mean, I guess for me, the first question would be, with less of a body of work, is when I read something, what do I like, right? And I know that people like a canned answer is, kind of blood and thunder, quick pacing. But I actually think it's, I mean, and certainly for some stories that can be great, but for me, it's, if I can be a little off color, is like, while I'm reading this thing, why do I give a shit? Like the coolest fight against a great monster, but I don't care who's fighting it, or just even an exploration of, to go away from like sword and sorcery to just kind of high fantasy, right? Everybody knows that Tolkien loves spending his time describing Middle Earth and in beautiful sweeping passages, etc. And a lot of fantasy writers seek to emulate it, but they never give you a reason to care. They're just telling you about a mountain valley, etc. And so, I mean, I really think the biggest thing is, if you can't make me care, you can't immerse me. And so I think, and I think that's why I don't respond very well sometimes to a lot of flash fiction, because for me, I need to get into it a little bit. I need more words than that. And I understand that that's me, but yeah, I really think it's you've got to give me some reason to feel that I'm there.
I know it's very trite to say, well, the characters are the most important, but if you don't care about the people, then you're not really going to care what they're fighting and what their motivations are and the rest of it. So it's really, I think, in sword and sorcery that you see, and heroic fiction in general, that you see this very careful balance between the characters and what they're doing in terms of like character plot type of thing. Because if you come up with the people, then you need to say to yourself, well, what kind of adventures would these people get into? Like not just sort of general, generic adventures, but these particular people, what would happen to them? And of course, out of your understanding of the characters, their dilemmas become apparent to you. And I think you're absolutely right. If you don't care about the characters, you haven't got a story.
Yeah, Howard, I'm going to give three quick, obvious ones, right? What makes a Conan story a Conan story is the character of Conan always in this situation that he doesn't really fit in, and people talk about how there isn't much about him in his own Samaria or in the north, but really that's because honestly, I think Howard knew what he was doing there. I think Conan's much less interesting if he's surrounded by others like him, right? So there's a bit of the outsider that runs through it, and of course Howard had a bit of the outsider mentality. Fafford and Mouser, since they make their reappearance in 6, I mean, what makes those stories great is the dynamic between those two guys, and the fact that in the midst of some horrible disaster they've wandered into, they're still bickering like an old married couple, and exactly how their own foibles will get them into this, right? Like they each have their area where they're very smart and where they are victims of their own sort of hubris. And then since I'm doing an interview with you, and since you're the person who lured me into reading those freaking bricks that are called the Harold Lamb collection, the Klitz, the Cossack stories, you and I have talked about this before. A lot of people feel like those old adventure stories, the pacing is off compared to modern writing, and I really don't think so. I think they're nuts. I think Lamb was building a world, and introducing people to a world that his average reader knew nothing about. But what's interesting to me about those stories is that Clit himself is a bit of a cipher. Like, you don't always get really deep insights into his plots and his plans, etc. And you sort of experience them. But again, it's a bit of that outsider. And what makes those stories work for me is the fact that he's an older guy who's seen it all, done it all, and just given up and headed east, basically just thinking that maybe he'll find a good death along the way. And it makes him a really different character than a lot of adventure stories. You know, there's a great one that I just read, and I'm sorry, I just can't remember the name now. But it's in the whole, you know, Abdul Dost series there, where he finally loses a sword fight, and it just sort of breaks him. You know, he's sort of a broken man after that, ready to die, who's got to kind of find his point back, because his health, literally his body fails him. And it's the first time you've seen that idea of his age. And I mean, and that's brilliant. That makes the whole story really work. And so yeah, I guess that's why it always bothered me when you would take creative writing classes and your lit professors be like, remember, it's not about genre, it's about character. And it's like, all good stories are about character, right? All good stories are about that's a stupid comment, and it grated on my nerves now, and 30 years later, it grates on my nerves. So anyway.
My academic connections are always saying, you know, it's the character-driven versus plot-driven. That's the terminology that they use. And they seem to be totally unaware of the fact that the characters have nowhere to drive unless there's a plot. And the plot can't drive anywhere unless there are characters. So right. It's ridiculous to polarize writing in this way. Because if the writing really was polarized that way, nobody would enjoy any of it.
Exactly.
The plot-driven stuff would bore the pants off people, and the character-driven stuff would bore the pants off of the other half of the people. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's ridiculous to do this to create these false dichotomies and these false juxtapositions.
I agree. And one of you touched upon something earlier as well. I think it was you, Violet. You said that characters, basically you were suggesting that they needed to be distinctive. And I think that one of the things that really stands out is that you can read a great action story where the main character or characters could be substituted by other main characters, but it's always a better story if these events would only occur and have the reaction that happens with the characters who are in that story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you think, you know,
what they like best about working with me, the skull. Ask them what they.
Sorry. Well, I don't know if you heard that or not. The skull wants to know what you like best about working with him.
That he's let us continue to live.
A major point.
Yeah,
a major point.
Fairly said.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I see one of my minions is telling me that we're running a little bit short on time, so perhaps we should just wrap it up with a final question, and that is, where can readers find your other writing? Violet?
Everywhere. All my books are still in print. They're available in bookstores and Amazon and everywhere else. You know, if you're in the Southern Ontario area, you could do me a favor and buy my books at my brother's store, because you know that will keep the wolf away from his door. But otherwise, you can get them anywhere.
And where would you like them to start?
With the Dylan and Parnos, other than the stories that are in Tales from the Magician's Skull, which I think is an excellent place for people to start. The first novel is The Sleeping God, and they're chronological in the sense that obviously they were written in a particular order, and there's a kind of overarching character arc that happens over the 4 books or 5. But they don't have to be written or read, I should say, in any particular order. There's a self-contained adventure in each book. So in that sense, they're more like a series of mystery novels rather than, you know, the traditional fantasy series that.
I got you. So each one could stand alone. It might be more fun to read them in order, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Like when if I'm sort of, you know, hand selling them myself, I'll say to people like, you know, do you like, you know, what are your hobbies? You know, like if your hobby, you know, if you like the theater and stuff, well, then read The Soldier King. If you're into, crazy religions and insane priests, well, then the sleeping god. So you want a pirate adventure, the Storm Witch. You want a serial killer, Path of the Sun.
Okay.
So
How about you, Greg? Where else can we find your work?
Well, so far I've only published short stories. Like everyone, there's a couple novels sitting on my hard drive. But the stories, besides the one that's in Skull and Future Skull, there are several up at Heroic Fantasy Quarterly. There are a couple coming out at some indeterminate time in the future in some Rogue Blades publishing anthologies. There's at least 2. I would say that if people wanted to get a feel for the world, again, they're short stories, so they're meant to be self-contained. But a good, the place to start with the stories of Omedo and Calcaeus is in the current Skull. It is meant to be the first story to introduce them. The next one, as you know, Howard, takes place just immediately in line with it. And I do have an idea for a sort of a meta arc, but the stories are meant to work on their own. But I've always kind of hated where a short story, each time you join the character, you have no idea. There's like no reference to whatever came before. It's like they live in a vacuum, bad 1960s or 70s television. So I definitely make sure that I put a little breadcrumb trail in there for people to realize that these people have lives and that they move from story to story. If someone just wanted to read a completely self-contained story and see, even like this world, they could either read the one in the current Heroic Fantasy Quarterly called Old Ghosts, which is actually, ironically, very, very different than anything I've written. It is sort of a ghost story, but set in the same world, but really gives a feel for the setting. Or they could obviously read the current one in Skull, which is Shadows of a Forgotten Queen. So I think they'd both be good starting places.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both again for making it to our spectacular. I'm going to have to bid you farewell and get ready for the next segment.
Well,
Excellent.
Thanks for including us.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Very much a pleasure.
Appreciate it. I hope that you're both working on more fiction for us.
We are. I am.
Sure.
All right. Until next time then.
Bye-bye.
With me now is the fearless publisher of my spectacular magazine, Joseph Goodman.
Greetings, Skull. I'm sorry I'm late, but the intern was late with my coffee, but I am now properly caffeinated.
I hope that you dealt with him appropriately.
He is no longer with us.
Excellent. Tell me, why are the fulfillment minions lagging? Have you not placed a haste spell upon them?
We tried, but we couldn't get enough cows for the sacrifice. So we are applying the lash as much as we can, and issue 6 will be shipped out as soon as humanly possible, as soon as inhumanly possible. We're working as hard as we can.
I suppose that will have to do. Tell me, what do you enjoy most about working with me, the Skull?
You are an inspirational leader, Skull. I feel like my management style has evolved, and I really have become a better people manager and undead manager as a result of your wisdom and insight.
Excellent, excellent. Why did you become a publisher?
That's a very good question. I guess I washed out as a computer science major and couldn't get another job. Don't know.
What is a computer science major?
It is like when you have 3 rocks and add a 4th, and then you have 4 rocks, and then you make lots of complicated symbols and incantations to make a 5th rock appear.
Yes, this I understand. Tell me, when did you realize that sword and sorcery was the greatest of all genres?
Oh, I believe I was born on the battlefield, just like Conan. Crom knows I've known that for a long time.
Yes, I sensed this in you from the first, good man.
Thank you, Almighty Skull.
I have a puzzling question for you. At least it has puzzled me. Tell me, why would anyone wish to keep up with the Kardashians?
Well, they probably make good sacrifices. It's probably worth watching that show so you understand at what point they're ready for, further usage in our nefarious schemes.
I see. I do not understand the challenge, you see. The show is called Keeping Up With, but they seem easy to catch. They just laze about and complain about cosmetics.
That is true. Clearly, they've not been challenged in their life. But if they worked for you, they'd meet an appropriate challenge, and I'm sure they would. Well, maybe they wouldn't rise to meet it. We'd have to find out.
Hmm. This topic wearies me. When Joseph is not publishing my magazine, he oversees the production of a storytelling game using geometric oracles. Tell me, good man, which of these shapes is best?
Ah, that is a very fine question and worthy of much debate. I would say that I personally prefer the seven-sided die. In fact, I have many in the drawer behind me here. Just because it's weird and asymmetrical, and it kind of blows your mind a little bit. And when I was a kid, I didn't even know such a thing could exist. So I'd say the seven-sided die.
7 is a fortuitous number.
Yes.
Why do you think people enjoy storytelling games?
Well, I think they need to be an escape. I think a lot of people have regular lives that bore them, and there's a reason our storytelling games are not called, cubicles and conference rooms, but instead are called Dungeons and Dragons, because it gives us a chance to get out of everyday life and feel like heroes. What do you think, Skull?
I have no need for such things because I am mighty and astounding. I do not need to pretend or imagine. I am.
That's true. You're already living the life we all wish we could live, or the unlife. I wish I could live your unlife.
Yes. Well, that could be arranged.
I suppose it could. I'll watch what I ask for. I'm going back to my coffee.
Yes. I have a final question. I prepared this in advance. Yes. Share with our viewers your hopes for our magazine.
That is a terrific question. I think that this year and last year, with 2020 and 2021, have been challenging for many people. And for those of you who have been affected by it, you have my sympathy. We've all had some impact to it. but I think we have great things ahead. I'm sure many of you have heard there's actually a paper shortage right now in America. But as we get past that and get past all the logistics problems and all the challenges of where we are, what we hope to do is bring this magazine to you not once a year, not twice a year, but 3 times a year and maybe even 4 times a year. We had an outstanding response to our open call. We have so much good material to work with. And I feel like we have a really bright future ahead in terms of bringing people many fine issues and lots of amazing stories.
Yes, exactly. The future is very bright. We have eradicated the gorilla infestation. The men have long been put to rest. Soon all shall be in place. The stars are right.
Exactly. The future is even brighter when you have 2 eyeballs. I can see really well right now, and it's very bright.
Yes. Well, mine shall return soon from the ethereal plane, and then I too shall have binocular vision. Is there anything more that you wish to say, good man?
I appreciate your audience, and I'm sorry to have disturbed you from your slumber and your meditations. I hope you're able to find the magical peace that you're seeking.
Not at all. Today is a day of celebrations for the launching of the 6th issue of our spectacular magazine.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I declare this segment concluded.
Thank you, Mighty Skull.
Hello, everyone. And now we're back with 3 more writers and the illustrious and peerless publisher of our lovely magazine, Mr. Joseph Goodman. Oh, yes.
Your coffee.
Oh, thank you. One of the interns. It's cold.
Sorry.
Okay. So, as I was saying, we're all back, and these 3 gentlemen have been in the magazine several times now. Chris and James are regulars. I don't think that either of you's missed an issue yet, have you?
No,
And
we always
Nathan,
sneak in somehow.
always sneak in somehow. And of course, Nathan's been in a prior issue, and he's definitely in 6, writing a new Lankhmar adventure. Nathan, I think it was William King who mentioned that I needed to start checking your work out. I asked him for some other great Warhammer writers, and he mentioned you in addition to Clint Werner. And gosh, that's probably been at least 12 years ago at this point. I'm trying to remember when it was we met, but I've enjoyed all of your work. I think I was particularly taken by the Black Hearts and the Ulrika novels, but I'm also a huge fan of the Jane Carver books. Why don't you tell, which are your favorites, or do you have one? Is it hard to single them out?
I think you picked the ones that I like the best. The Black Hearts books were the first books that I wrote for Warhammer. It was basically Dirty Dozen in the Warhammer world. So I got to play with a lot of characters at once. It was kind of an ensemble cast, and it was fun to bounce them all off of each other. It was fun to write sort of a Saturday morning serial, kind of go from one cliffhanger to the next, to the next, to the next kind of writing. So I really enjoyed those books. They were a lot of fun. It was great getting them into impossible situations and then finding ways to get them out of them. I remember the worst 2 weeks of my life were when I got to the part in the synopsis that I had written where I said, they break out of jail. And then I had to figure out how they broke out of jail, and that took 2 weeks.
You know, that's happened to me. I had the one scene in, God, I think it was Desert of Souls, where basically De Beer had to come up with something brilliant to solve the problem, and it sounded so clever on the page. It takes him 2 seconds in the book, and it took me like 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about
Good
James,
idea
Chris?
here.
Yeah, have you guys had that problem?
Exactly.
I'm sorry, Nathan, go on.
And then the Ulrika books, she was just a great character to work with, because she's a woman that's very recently turned into a vampire, and she's very honorable sort of warrior when she was alive, and she's thrust into a world of duplicity and masquerade and backbiting, and she can't stand it, and so she's always trying to break out of her she's always rebelling against the vampire society. And they were a lot of fun to write. I've read through them now and recently, and all I can see is the things that I want to fix that will never get fixed. But I think the first one's pretty damn good, and the second and third are good. So
I enjoyed them all. Well, James, I've known you since Black Gate days, back when it was actually a glorious print magazine. And I still remember John O'Neill telling me when he pulled the first Morlock story out of Slush, he thought that maybe someone was trying to pass off some Vance story he'd never read. It's original work. And of course, I got to be there during that one convention where you were up for the World Fantasy Award, which was exciting.
Well, that was in Ohio, and I figured they wanted a local. That was my theory. I went up to well-deserved defeat against China Miebo, but
well, I'm still hoping that one from our merry band will win a World Fantasy Award. And Morlock cool. is certainly deserving. How long have you been writing Morlock now?
I'm embarrassed to say. I had a series of unbearably bad fantasy novels I wrote in high school, and Morlock appeared as a secondary character in those. And when I was 25, I burned everything that I had written up to that point. But Morlock kept bothering me, so I started writing stories about Morlock. And then it was only, I don't know, it was only like 20 years after that that John O'Neill over at Black Gate published what was then the first published Morlock story.
And how many are there now? It was written
while my son was in utero, and he was old enough to drive before it saw print.
Ouch. Oh, and that first story was so glorious too. It's just about finding the right editor or skull, possibly.
There were no markets for Sword and Sorcery. Lots of fantasy magazines said all types of fantasy except Sword and Sorcery. There are always comparisons to like the Iron Dream, the Spinrad novel about that's supposedly by Adolf Hitler in a parallel universe. Yeah, Sword and Sorcery had a terrible reputation in the 80s and 90s. So of course I was obsessed with writing it. But the market's changed. That's one thing I learned.
It's true. And Chris, I picked up Conan and the Emerald Lotus, and I was about a third of the way into it, and just marveling over it and thinking, man, I've got to talk to this guy. It wasn't just that you knew how to tell a good story and that Conan was acting like Conan, and I was captivated by the plot. It was the whole weird tales infusion that you got that so many other Conan pastiche writers never seem to understand. You got the whole world as well. And of course, your work appeared in Black Gate. And some of that, of course, is in the same world as that your current Skull character is wandering around in, although I don't know that that's at all apparent to the readers. Are you ever going to have a meet in the Skull?
The idea was that eventually the archivist and Lucello would meet up with Benhus at some point, but that's not for a while. I'm playing a long game. Whether I actually get there or not, I'm uncertain. But yeah, that was in the cards.
How far out do you plan the stories?
Well, for serious planning of the stories like that, the next story and the next few stories are elaborately planned, and those are concrete. The future is sketchier, but it goes forward some distance. It's fun to think of the direction you want to take the stories, but it's sitting down and making each individual one concrete is what that's where the real focus is.
Are any of you planning to have the Skull join your characters in as a sidekick?
And he would dominate the story far too much. The story would surely become only about the Skull, and I don't think I got the literary chops to cover that.
Yeah, he'd be flattered, but it probably wouldn't be a great Sword and Sorcery fiction.
There's precedent, though. There's a L. Ron Hubbard, if I can speak that name in this company. He wrote a case. What was it? The Case of the Restless Corpse, where he summoned Harold. His character summoned Harold Shea from a different universe, and he apparently was destroyed. And Pratt and DeCamp were going to write a sequel in which it turned out that Shea was not destroyed, but they never got around to it. But
my favorite of those is when Lynn Carter wrote himself into the Callisto series.
Yes,
Lankar of Callisto, which is actually a hoot.
I haven't gotten that far in the Callisto books, but I got a stack of them on my TBR.
It's the sixth one. For those of you who don't know the Callisto books, they're basically Carter doing a pastiche of the Mars books, except set on the moon of Callisto. And in the sixth one, up until then, he's doing the whole Barosian thing where he's pretending to be the guy who's recording the adventures being told to him by the actual adventurer. But he goes through the secret portal and ends up on Callisto. And they call him, instead of Len Carter, they call him Lankar of Callisto. So it's completely absurd. It shouldn't work, but it's actually kind of awesome.
I love Burroughs' pastiche because although I think Burroughs was a great inventor of worlds and characters, I kind of feel like his storytelling, it was always, somebody kidnapped the princess. So when I'm reading when Carter does it, or in Jane Carver, the Jane Carver books, I feel like it's scratching an itch that Burrow never quite reached.
Yeah, the plots are different. And Jane Carver was a lot of fun. There's two of those that you wrote, right, Nathan?
Yeah. Believe it or not, like 2 days ago, I got fan mail from somebody saying, when is the third one coming out? It's like, find me a publisher. But yeah, I mean, I wrote Jane Carver. In a way, I wrote Jane Carver because I love the worlds of John Carter of Mars, and Edgar Rice Burroughs' like world building was great, but when I started writing that book, I went back and tried to read a couple of the novels, and it was like, wow, the plotting was just so A to B, B to C, so so my inspiration was to write a, something with a modern plot, but with that feeling, that, that bold, tales of bold adventure kind of feeling. So.
How did you set out doing the Lankmar story once you got the green light? How did you approach it?
Well, I went back and read all of those. Like I read the whole canon in about 2 months, and the story that I wrote for the Skull, thank you, Skull. The story that I wrote for the Skull sort of came out of something that, if you know Fritz Lieber, you know that the other thing that he really liked. I mean, his father was a professional actor, a professional stage actor who toured the States, and also was in movies. And Fritz loved the theater, and so I wanted to write a story that took Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and Fritz's other great love and put them together. So I wrote a story about Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser joining a theater troupe and having an adventure with a play that goes horribly wrong. And I mean, that was basically the genesis of it. It was, how can I put them, how can I make them act, put them in backstage scenes and have an insane ending at the same time.
Now, Joseph, it took a little bit of doing to make that happen. Do you want to? Should we share the incantations we had to work to pull this off?
We can't make this public, Howard.
Oh, it's true. Well, I tell you what,
we're still looking for some of those children.
We did look very carefully, and Nathan was our choice because we knew that he had loved the Lankmar books for a long time. And I remember, actually, Nathan, I remember one time we were at a convention and we were talking, said, if there's one set of characters I would love to write someday, it would be Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Absolutely.
And I never dreamed that I would be involved in being able to help grant you that wish. It was just this weird coincidence.
Yeah, I never dreamed that I would be able to write them. It's an incredible honor, an honor that I don't really feel like I'm deserving of, but I've absolutely jumped at the chance. Like when I was a kid and reading fantasy, like the first things that I read were The Lord of the Rings and Conan, and I liked them both. But when I read Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, it was just so. What was different about them was that they were actual people. They felt like Conan is sort of monolithic, right? And the Lord of the Rings characters, well, the hobbits have some human qualities, but everybody else is very heroic and very stiff. And I just loved the fact that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser are humans with weaknesses, and they're sometimes not very bright. They get themselves into situations they can't get themselves out of. They're just like, I saw myself and my own weaknesses and my own ridiculousness in them, and so they just endeared themselves to me because of their humanity, and that's why I've always loved them. It's something that I've tried to bring into the heroes that, my own heroes that I write, is that as seriously as they may take themselves, they're always falling on their faces.
Well, here's a question for the group at large here then. When you're constructing your characters, do you think it's better to make them lovable or fascinating? I know Chris in particular, Benhus, his ongoing character with the skull, a lot of people don't seem to like him very much, but they keep reading him anyway. And I know Morlock's not necessarily not always like the most personable guy, and yet readers love him. So what do you think the secret is to making an engaging character? Chris, I'll let you start.
Well, I deliberately tried to make Bennis different than characters I'd written in the past. I wanted a more hard-boiled character, more one that you wouldn't necessarily relate to immediately and would find, because the characters I was in over his head, I was uncertain as to what's going to happen next. Maybe you'd identify with him a little bit as the story rolled on. I thought that could be fascinating, and that's what I was aiming at. Plus, and I'm also really fond of the hard-boiled crime fiction, as there's no shortage of sort of ambivalent characters in that, and I found that was often fascinating. I was trying to get a similar effect in Sword and Sorcery, so only the readers know for sure.
How about you, James?
Well, Morlock is actually three characters, depending on whether he's drinking or not. But I think that the hard-boiled fiction comparison is a great one, because I think Sword and Sorcery characters have to have that kind of toughness and their ability to make decisions in an area of moral grayness. But I think too that probably the first character that I was really into as a character was the original Spider-Man, who was kind of a screw up in lots of ways. Sure, he had superpowers, but he couldn't figure out who to date, or how to get a job, or how to deal with the bully in high school. So and I don't know that I liked him very much, but he was the only person in the comics. I liked Superman too, but I couldn't relate to Superman. So I think having a character whose flaws you can see, and who has problems that they're working out as they work out the plot problems. I always kind of like that as a reader. So that's one thing I try and hit.
How about you, Nathan? What do you think?
That's definitely it. I like a character who is not sure of themselves, and certainly not sure of their decisions, because then you as the reader can sort of suffer or feel anxiety about the decisions that they are working through as you are watching them work through them. People who heroes who always know exactly what they're doing, and live by moral codes where they never really have a decision to make because the moral code gives them the decision. Those characters are not as interesting. And so, like, when I was writing for Warhammer, I read some of the other stuff, and I read the lore, and so many of those characters are like Space Marines. They have they're just fighting machines, and they don't have any humor, they don't have any sex, they don't nothing. So when I was asked to write a Warhammer novel, I wrote a Warhammer novel with people who were fallible, vain, greedy, unsure of themselves, stumbling through their problems and coming up with solutions at the last minute by mistake, because that is much more interesting to me as a writer to write and as a reader to read. So.
Let me change tacks here. We're sort of at an interesting place with Sword and Sorcery. It's been maligned for so long, as James was saying, it wasn't so long ago where he couldn't place what is truly an excellent story, one of my favorite of the Morlocks, which is the very first one. Markets were scarce. Well, now there seem to be more and more of them. Yet Sword and Sorcery still has a questionable reputation in some quarters. What do you think we as writers, and Joseph and I, as publishers and editors, what do you think we can do with this new edge on Sword and Sorcery? What distinguishes it from what's come before? How can we draw in more readers?
I would say don't become respectable. That's one of the reasons I love Sword and Sorcery, is because it's not respectable. There's a real danger, I think. William Tenn wrote an interesting article for fantasy and science fiction back in the 1970s. And he was talking about the difference that he perceived between the science fiction of his youth and the science fiction of then, the 70s. And it wasn't as much fun for him, which is something that old guys say a lot about, stuff they read when they were kids and stuff they read now. So, I mean, some of that you just have to disregard. But the title of the piece was Jazz Then, Musicology Now. And he thought everything had gotten too thinky. And it didn't have the swing and the improvisation of great jazz. And I whether he's right about science fiction, I don't know, but I would hate to see that happen to Sword and Sorcery, where you can't swing, where you can't do something just because it feels right in the course of a story. So no respectability.
I'll start growing out my hair. Maybe grow a mustache.
You need to get a big bushy 70s mustache.
There you go.
Yeah. What about you other guys though? What do you think is the new edge here?
I think it's challenging to drum up an audience, especially when I'm speaking from this perspective of the skull. I mean, we're writing short fiction, and that's not necessarily an immediate draw to a lot of modern readers, which is that's an issue all by itself. But as an author, all you can do is is write the best story I can and hope that somebody notices. I wish that that the reviewers were more open to looking at Sword and Sorcery. I think there's been some change in that. We've seen a little bit of that, and we could use more. And that there were more. I wish there was actually awards in the realm of Sword Sorcery. I mean, there was the Jamel Award for a while there, and it's gone south. That's no longer extant. And there isn't. Science fiction and fantasy were well known as genres that produced plenty of awards for themselves, and yet there really isn't anything. There isn't any organized sort of attempt to provide awards in Sword and Sorcery. That might help.
What I would say is, I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm 59, and what would help Sword and Sorcery would be to hire people who are younger than me. because like, if you want new readers and young readers, you should hire new writers and young writers, people who are of the generation that is buying these books now and will buy them in the future. If you're selling to people my age and older, we're going to be dead soon, so we won't be buying books. So if you want,
how soon do you plan to buy? We might still have 20 years.
Yes, I'm gonna have a will that just buys books after I'm dead.
It's a good thought.
But that's what I would say is like if you want to freshen up the genre, hire fresh voices, people who I'm not saying this to get myself out of a job, but I'm just saying like find young people.
I think you guys all have valid points, but I think the best we can do is just have fun. I think if you have fun doing what you love, other people who appreciate it will find you eventually. And I enjoy this. I think you guys do too. Let's keep having fun.
There you go.
I think that's true. I think it's an excellent point. Well, I guess I'm curious to hear a little bit about, we glanced off of it earlier, James, but we didn't really discuss, Morlock's been around a long time. How many novels has he appeared in, and where else are you wanting to take him? And do you have like an entire cycle planned out? I mean, what?
I think I know where he ends up, but every now and then I put that aside. So he's been in 6 novels so far, and at least a couple books worth of short stories. I'm sort of trying to put them together in different collections. You know, when I was writing the Wolf Age, it was my third book for Pyre and the last book on that contract. So I decided I would have the liberty of killing Morlock in the course of that story. And it affected how I wrote the book. So I think having some idea about the future is fine, but being willing to throw the outline out and, as Zelazny often said, trust your demon. I think that's good. But the short stories are they're coming out in Magician's Skull in like way out of chronological order. Maybe I should create an outline and put it up somewhere, so that people know whether you're dealing with drunk Morlock or Morlock in recovery or old Morlock or young Morlock or whatever.
Nathan, I know that you and I know that you're planning on other Lockmar stories, and of course we can't discuss them, but why don't you share with the readers about how far out you're planning?
I haven't really planned too far in the future. Like the thing with the Lankmar stories, with the Fafhrd Grey Mouser stories, are they all have to be slightly nebulously set, right? Because they cannot conflict with the canon timeline. So they have to fit in between those stories, and we probably shouldn't say exactly where they fit in between those stories. So it's more, I think, about what era of Fafhrd the Grey Mouser are we going to set the stories, rather than what the stories are going to be. It's like, is it going to be a mid-period? Is it going to be, are they going to be old and in Rime Isle? Probably not, whatever. As far as, it's like because there's an established timeline there, it's more about finding great stories that you guys like and fit well within the parameters that I that the actual chronology allows me to work in. So
makes sense. Well, I'm getting a signal here that the Skull's growing impatient. He has important news he wants to share. So we've got just another few minutes. Is there anything that you guys would like to say about your work, or Sword and Sorcery, or praise for the Skull before we sign off?
all praise the Skull.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank Chris, James, and Nathan for being here with us. And
it was fun.
Skull is back and forth. I see him signaling that he wants to get on with it. So I think we better switch over to that next segment. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
everybody.
Yeah.
See you all later.
And now a special message with the Skull.
Heed me, mortal dogs! Prepare yourselves for a momentous announcement. Last winter it was brought to my attention that many of you murder trees, drag them to your homes, set them alight, and then sing songs celebrating a white-bearded red god who delivers vengeance to the wicked and gifts to the obedient. I found this fascinating, and when I inquired about other celebratory occasions, I was told about the Day of Hearts, where small images of life-sustaining organs are traded and devoured. Also Avian Consumption Day, where the folk of America gather to talk as little as possible while eating millions of dead birds. As other holidays were described, it grew obvious none of them celebrated that most glorious of all traditions, sword and sorcery. This is to be remedied at once. That is why I, the Skull, decree that henceforth October 23 is to be known as the Day of Might. True believers are to gather at the sound of a gong and light a candle in memory of the day I first revealed myself unto the modern world. They are to trade sword and sorcery related gifts such as the Hour of the Dragon, Swords in the Mist, and Tales from the Magician's Skull, among other fine items. They are to read aloud passages from their favorite sword and sorcery tales. Also, they are to raise a toast to me, drinking mead or beer of the root, for my magnificent vision. Go forth now and tell your priests and kings of my announcements. If February 2 can be sacred to the ground chuck, and May the 4th sacred to the Star Trek, October 23 can be sacred to us. That is all.
Hi, everybody.
That was pretty astounding news from the Skull. Of course, Joseph and I first heard that editorial being screamed to one of the interns while it was being dictated. And I know the Skull's been wanting to get that out to the masses for a long time. It's pretty important stuff, though, don't you think, Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that we've made it this far in recorded history without a national holiday celebrating sword and sorcery. It's really just a shame. So
Yeah,
I'm glad the Skull is here to rectify that.
It's inspired, is what it is.
It makes you wonder, when you was first walking the earth, or I guess floating the earth 2,000 years ago, I wonder if they had such a celebration and just, recorded history somehow forgot it. It's hard to say for sure.
Probably there was so much might there all the time that you didn't, it's kind of like Children's Day, right?
Yes. Yeah, they probably had like a slow Sunday that was the day of unmight because everybody was so busy.
Yeah, right.
Using their mighty thews to sprint and chop.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So
well, it is exciting.
The day of might's just around the corner, really.
October 23rd.
Yeah.
Circle it on your calendar in red. Actually, you can cut out all the other days and just leave that one day on your refrigerator because that's the only day that matters.
If you have a letter opener shaped like a knife, drive it through your calendar.
Yes. Or if you have a knife, drive it through your calendar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So should we talk about what we're planning for the Day of Might?
I think we should.
Yeah, that would make sense given the nature of the show. So everybody, the Skull has decreed that the Day of Might will be October 23rd. And we actually had some fans commenting on the Kickstarter, asking the Kickstarter from like 2 years ago, asking when the next Kickstarter is going to be. So we're going to start the next Kickstarter right after the Day of Might. The Day of Might will be a celebration of all things sword and sorcery. And, we welcome your input on that. And we have our own ideas as well. Howard, I think we should probably have some more panels like this and talk to some of the authors and that sort of stuff. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. There should be a gong involved.
I got one right there.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Maybe we need a bigger one though. And what kind of office only has one gong? I guess I need to get a second one.
Yes, I think that's wise.
How do you summon your interns, Howard? Do you use a gong?
Telepathy.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I need a better gong for summoning my interns. The coffee's always cold by the time they get here.
You need to shout more. You're too kind.
Okay. All right. But yes, we'll have gongs and everything. Everything you'd want on a Day of Might will be present, including gongs.
That's true. And we'll have to select texts to read aloud because the Skull decreed that we need to select some favorite passages from our sword sorcery tales and drink what was it, mead or beer of the root. So I've got some root beer around here. I've had mead once and I can't say as I was really fond of it. So that probably disqualifies me as a sword sorcery writer. I don't know. Hopefully not.
You still got the writing part of being a writer.
That's true.
Which may qualify despite the lack of mead drinking. Yeah. Speaking of reading aloud, it's funny. My older son is 9. I was ducking back and forth to try to help out in bath time tonight. But like a month or two ago, we read a bedtime story. I actually started reading Robert E. Howard to him, which is the first time I've ever read it aloud. And the first time I've ever read it, like in, I don't know what we read, 15 minutes every night or whatever it is before bedtime. It took us like a week to get through Tower of the Elephant. But it's actually really interesting reading his work, because I always heard the story that he would like shout it at his typewriter, as he would, I guess, write or shout. Does read like really lyrically when you say it out loud, which I didn't realize until I was reading it out loud to a child.
It really does. Cool. It's interesting. I did that when my kids were younger. I read them The Tower of the Elephant, and I also read them a Lee Brackett story, Sea Kings of Mars. And they love them both, and they're both very lyrical writers, slightly different in style, but Yeah,
Yeah.
it just leaps off the page.
I mean, maybe we should try some of that for Day of Might. Who knows?
That's true. I mean, maybe the skull should read out loud the entire Hour of the Dragon. Oh, the skull story hour could be called the Hour of the Dragon.
There you go. You might be onto something there. Although his voice is not exactly, calming or refreshing.
I don't know why you would say that.
Yeah. Sorry. Don't spite me.
I mean, he's right around the corner getting ready for the next segment, isn't he? Oh, that's right. He's going to be interviewing you next.
Oh, that's right. Oh, wait, no, is he? Oh, no. Oh, no, he's interviewing you next.
Oh,
You're next
oh
with him.
no.
You better be nice.
Right.
Anyway, so the Day of Might, everybody, we're kind of going off track here, but the point is, October 23rd, we're going to do something to celebrate Sword and Sorcery and hopefully repeat this every year as some sort of celebration of the genre. And then we will be launching a Kickstarter probably the next day for the next round of issues of Tales from the Magician's Skull. There was somebody in the chat earlier who asked us to talk about art, which is probably a whole, whole other topic in itself. But just to throw it out there, Ken Kelly is working on a cover for the next run of Tales from the Magician's Skull, and San Julian's also doing another one, and some other folks. So hopefully by the time we get to the next Kickstarter, we will have some really awesome art to show you, in addition to many fine stories. And actually, Howard, I mean, the results of that open call were phenomenal, and we got so many great stories in. So I can't wait to share some of those, with everybody. They were great.
I'm excited too. We've got a lot of great things coming up in the next few years. Yeah.
Next few decades.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like our clock is Nathan's heart. So let's keep him alive.
Yeah, Nathan needs to keep going for us.
Yeah.
Well, I should probably step off camera to the studio lair for the next segment.
Good point.
So I'll see all of you shortly.
All right. Good luck.
With me now is mortal scribe and chief editorial minion, Howard Andrew Jones. Also second to last on my to-be-immolated list. Tell me, what is your favorite thing about working with me, the Skull?
Well, your enthusiasm, your thorough knowledge of the subject matter, and your benefits package is very nice.
Yes, indeed. When will issue 8 return from Lester the Layout Wizard?
Well, right now it's in the Chamber of Trigons being ritually purified, so no more than a couple of days.
Very good. How did Goodman choose you to be his editor?
Well, first there was the Maze of Terror, and then I had to survive the trial by combat, and I was the only survivor, so here I am.
Very good. What makes a good adventure story? Reveal your secrets!
Well, there has to be a hook, and for momentum, I like to see interesting characters doing interesting things in interesting places, and it helps if those characters are distinctive and original. And let's face it, there has to be a little bit of magic. And I don't just mean the cool sword and sorcery kind, there also has to be some storytelling magic, as I'm sure you know.
Oh, yes. What made you want to become a storyteller?
I'm not sure I know. It's something that I've always felt pulled to do.
Could it be a curse?
Well, now that you mention it, I guess I'm always thinking about storytelling in one way or another. If I'm reading a book or watching a movie, I'm often thinking about the story and the characters at some level. And all these years I've been playing games, it's usually some kind of storytelling game. So I guess storytelling is kind of a compulsion.
Like the compulsion to drive your enemies before you.
Yeah, just like that.
The 3rd book in Jones's heroic fiction trilogy has just been published. I command you to purchase it forthwith.
Thank you for that recommendation, Skull. I think a lot of our viewers probably know that many of the writers who we've published in Tales from the Magician's Skull have been published in other magazines, as well as in short story collections and novels. And we hope that you will support all of them. Writers like James Enge, Chris Wilrich, Chris Hocking, Nathan Long, Violette Malan, Clint Werner, William King, Milton Davis. I could go on and on. They deserve your support.
Do as Jones says. Support the modern scribes of sword and sorcery. This segment is at an end. It is time for another.
Wow, I wish we had time for even more segments, but unfortunately we are out of time. We are not immortal, unlike the Skull, and we can't keep doing this all night long. But we thank you all for joining us for the inaugural episode of Skull TV. If you like this, we would love to do it again. So tell us that you liked it, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and what else you'd like to see and hear on Skull TV. To answer one of the recent questions in the chat, so there will be another Kickstarter in mid to late October, going into November. It'll be funding the next run of issues for Tales from the Magician's Skull. We got so much great content out of our recent open call that we feel like we have enough phenomenal stories to last us quite a few issues. So the goal for this Kickstarter is to cover quite a few issues in the future. And we've commissioned quite a bit of awesome art that we hope to show you and convince you that these issues will come out and be amazing. And we'll have excerpts and interviews and so on. But we also plan to run more episodes of Skull TV over the course of the Kickstarter. And we hope you'll enjoy those too. But thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks to Greg and Violet and Chris and James and Nathan, and of course, Howard and the intern, I forget his name, I think it was 72. Anyway, thanks everybody. The Skull himself, of course, and we're gonna close. I believe that the Skull wants to give a few final comments before retiring to his crypt for the night. So good night, and let me hand it over to the Skull.
So endeth the first of my televised spectaculars. Ah! Octobear, get away from the camera! Seize that gibbering! Right the camera at once or face my wrath! As I was saying, so endeth the first of my televised spectaculars. Go forth now and tell all about the glories of my wondrous magazine!